While I was fighting for my life in the hospital, my husband was spending our money on another woman. He sold my possessions without my permission, spread lies about me, and tried to destroy everything I had worked so hard to build. But silently, I waited for the right moment. And when he least expected it, I acted in a way no one ever imagined. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment with the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I have always been an active woman, dedicated to my work as an interior designer, known for my perfectionism and attention to detail. But suddenly my life was interrupted when I started feeling constant pain and overwhelming fatigue. After the insistence of Margaret, my mother-in-law, I decided to see a doctor, believing it was just stress. The diagnosis was devastating. A serious illness that would require immediate treatment and a long recovery period. In shock, I had to suspend important projects, something that had never happened in my career. The feeling of helplessness consumed me, as I had always been the primary breadwinner while Daniel focused on his own investments. Now, with no energy, I found myself dependent on my husband's support. In the first few days of hospitalization, I expected Daniel to be by my side, holding my hand and giving me strength to face the treatment. However, his visits were quick, and his gaze seemed distant, almost impatient. Still, I tried to justify his behavior by telling myself he didn't know how to handle hospitals. After a night of intense pain, I woke up early, looking around the room for Daniel. But the space beside my bed was empty. His cell phone wouldn't answer, and an unsettling feeling filled my chest. I woke up in the hospital and didn't find Daniel by my side. Something told me this absence wasn't just a delay, and I was about to find out why. While I was fighting for my life, Daniel was finding comfort in the arms of Chloe, a younger and stunning woman he had met at a business event. Initially, he justified their closeness as a friendship, someone to talk to and relieve stress, but the relationship quickly took on a romantic and physical tone. For him, it was as if he were living a new youth, far from the responsibilities of a marriage marked by an illness he didn't want to face. Chloe saw Daniel as a successful man with a comfortable life, and the relationship soon became convenient for both of them. Daniel spent entire nights away from home, claiming professional commitments, while I believed he was trying to support our family during my time off. Gradually, Daniel started to hide his cell phone, putting passwords on apps and avoiding any closeness with me when he was on the phone. This change in behavior sparked a silent anguish within me, which I tried to ignore, believing it was just stress from the new routine. One morning, during a rare moment at home, I picked up Daniel's phone to make an emergency call, but a message on the screen caught my attention. I held the phone with trembling hands and read that message. "I miss you. I can't wait to see you tonight. Chloe." My heart stopped, but I needed to be sure before accusing him. With me debilitated and temporarily out of the workforce, Daniel made a cold and calculated decision. He began selling my personal belongings without consulting me. He justified the action by claiming financial difficulties caused by the pause in my career, but in reality, the money was being directed to support his relationship with Chloe and finance a parallel life. Items of sentimental value, like inherited jewelry and antique furniture that I had chosen myself, were put up for sale. All of this happened while I was still recovering, in no physical condition to handle administrative or financial matters. Daniel had my digital signature and unrestricted access to the accounts, taking advantage of my trust. When I returned home after a few weeks of treatment, the environment felt strange. Some cherished objects had disappeared, and a physical emptiness seemed to echo in the space. When I asked Daniel, he replied coldly that it was just what was necessary to pay for medical expenses and accumulated debts. I felt an emotional pain as intense as the physical pain of my illness. When I tried to open a drawer where I kept memories from our wedding, I noticed the box was empty. Old photos, documents, and even a special watch were gone. The impact was devastating, and still weak, I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Something inside me told me this was just the beginning of a much greater pain. I kept silent for a few days, trying to process the message I saw on Daniel's phone and the disappearance of my belongings. But when he came home, I could no longer hold back. With a trembling voice, I asked about Chloe and the items he had sold. Daniel initially tried to deny it, saying it was all in my head, and that his phone was not a couple's matter. The tension escalated when I showed him the message I had seen. Daniel's face changed, shifting from surprise to anger. He yelled that he was tired of being questioned and of having his freedom invaded. Even though I was weak, I stood firm, demanding respect and explanations. The argument intensified until Daniel, out of control, began to blame me, saying that my illness ruined everything, and that he deserved more than this life of sacrifices. I fell silent, shocked by the coldness of his words. The physical pain mixed with the emotional, making it hard to even breathe. Then he grabbed a suitcase, threw some clothes inside, and without looking back made a sharp announcement. "I'm leaving and I'm not coming back." I stood there trying to comprehend that I was now alone, without a husband, without support, and still sick. With Daniel's departure, I found myself alone in a silent and emotionally heavy house. The illness gave me no respite, requiring medication, a specific diet, and absolute rest, but now I had no one around to help with basic tasks. Even going to the pharmacy became a challenge. The following days were marked by pain and loneliness. Without close family support and with few friends, I tried to follow my routine as best I could. The bills began to pile up, as Daniel had left all financial responsibilities to me, even knowing I was sick and without an income. In a moment of extreme weakness, I tried to make myself something to eat, but my body wouldn't respond. I felt my vision darken and the floor disappear from under my feet. The fall was inevitable, and the impact of my body hitting the floor echoed through the silent house. I woke up hours later, my body aching and my mind in shock. Lying on the cold floor, I realized that if I didn't do something, no one would come to save me. When I regained consciousness, still feeling the cold of the floor, I managed to drag myself to the sofa, where I sat, reflecting on everything that had happened in recent months. For the first time, I felt a silent strength rising within me, an inner voice telling me I couldn't expect support from anyone. Daniel's abandonment had hurt me deeply, but it had also opened a door to something new, the chance to rebuild my life without depending on someone who had betrayed me. With tears in my eyes, I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the fragile, weary woman who was there. I knew I had two choices: continue to play the victim or turn that pain into fuel for a new beginning. The second option seemed impossible at that moment, but it was the only one that could give me a dignified life. And so, still weak, I began to plan a new life for myself. I still didn't know how I would do it, but I was determined to find the strength to move on, no matter what it cost. I thought nothing could get worse after Daniel left me, but I was wrong. My world, already fragile, was completely shattered when I discovered he had started spreading lies about me. He used information he knew from being my ex-husband and created a rumor that I had committed financial fraud. Hearing that was like a punch to the gut. He told acquaintances in the industry that I manipulated documents and embezzled funds, insinuating that my entire professional success was based on corruption. Worse, he presented forged evidence, details that only someone close could have known. In a few weeks, my name was tarnished. I felt the way people looked at me change. Calls from clients sounded cold, and important projects started to be canceled. Each message of distrust opened an invisible wound in me. I tried to explain myself, but it was like screaming in the middle of a storm. No one could hear me. When I opened an email from one of my oldest clients, terminating our contract with immediate effect, I felt my legs grow weak. My heart raced. If Daniel had done this, what else was he capable of? Watching my reputation crumble was worse than any physical pain. Fake profiles appeared on social media sharing biased news with manipulated documents linking me to financial crimes. Specialized websites published non-existent investigations, and people in my circle began to distance themselves as if I were a threat. I had always valued my honesty and my ethical work. Seeing it all thrown away by a lie was crushing. It was as if every effort, every sleepless night designing spaces and winning over clients, had been ripped away from me with a single blow. I tried to seek out lawyers, but without proof of who was behind the publications, the battle seemed endless. My body trembled with rage and helplessness. My mind began to break again, not from the illness but from the humiliation. Then I saw my own photo plastered on a slanderous post, accusing me of fraud. It was as if the image screamed, guilty, even though I had done nothing wrong. And in that moment I realized, someone needed to know the truth, and I would have to fight for it, even if I was alone. While I was trying to pick up the pieces, Margaret, my ex-mother-in-law, began to suspect her own son. She had always found his behavior strange, but seeing my state of devastation awakened something in her. She decided to investigate on her own, going through old documents and talking to Daniel's former partners. I didn't know it, but she was piecing together a puzzle that could change everything. That's how Margaret found suspicious bank records and archived email conversations, showing manipulations made by Daniel himself. The truth was clear. He had forged evidence and used his proximity to me to deliberately destroy me. The shock for Margaret was devastating. It was her son, but his cruelty was undeniable. And though shaken, she felt a moral obligation to stop it from continuing. When she found a hidden folder in Daniel's office, full of incriminating documents, my fate changed in that exact instant. Even though I didn't know it yet, something lit up inside me. Maybe I wasn't as alone in this fight as I had imagined. My body was still weak, but my determination grew with each passing day. I followed the treatment with discipline, facing side effects that drained my energy and caused incessant nausea. There were days I thought about giving up, when the pain seemed greater than I could bear. But then I would remember the life I wanted to rebuild. A life without depending on anyone. Each treatment session was like a silent battle. I would enter the room with a racing heart and leave exhausted, but with a spark of hope lit within me. It was a personal victory against everything Daniel had tried to destroy. The doctors were surprised by my progress, commenting on the strength with which I was reacting. With every test that came back with positive results, I felt a part of me being reborn, as if I were leaving behind not only the illness but also all the accumulated emotional pain. Over time, the fatigue lessened. I started eating better, taking light walks, and rediscovering small habits I had abandoned. When I was discharged from the hospital for the first time in months, I felt strength returning to my body. And in that instant, I knew I would no longer be the same fragile person who had entered that hospital. Free from intensive treatment, I decided it was time to restart my career. I started small, offering design services to acquaintances and neighbors. I knew I still carried the weight of the lies Daniel had spread, but my focus was on proving who I really was through my work. The first projects were simple, but each completed job returned a piece of the self-esteem I had lost. I carefully documented every result, publishing photos and testimonials from satisfied clients. Slowly, a new network of trust formed around me, made up of people who believed in my talent and my character. The process wasn't easy. Doors closed, suspicious glances still followed me, and former partners preferred silence. But I persisted. Not for revenge, but because I needed to rebuild my story brick by brick. Until one afternoon the phone rang. It was a former client, one of those who used to secure large contracts. He wanted to schedule a meeting in person. My heart sped up. That call could be the first step toward a true new beginning. While I was rebuilding my life, I received an unexpected visit, Margaret, my ex-mother-in-law. At first, I was tense. After all, she was the mother of Daniel, the man who had turned my life upside down. But to my surprise, she came to offer support. She said she never agreed with her son's actions, and that she admired my strength in getting back on my feet. We talked for hours. For the first time in a long time, I felt that someone was truly by my side without expecting anything in return. Her words were an immense emotional relief. Margaret encouraged me to stay strong, saying that the truth always comes out, even when it seems buried under lies. Her presence rekindled a silent faith in people within me. Despite everything, genuine human connection still existed, capable of offering comfort and strength in the most difficult times. When Margaret stood up to leave, she held my hand firmly and looked me in the eyes. "There's something about Daniel you need to know," she said, and my heart froze on the spot. The passing of Daniel's father brought about a family meeting fraught with tension. Even though I was no longer part of his life, I was summoned to attend, as there were mentions of my name in the will. I confess I was apprehensive. I didn't know why I would still be part of such an intimate family matter. The room was in absolute silence as the lawyer began the official reading. My heart raced when I heard my name. He announced that, by his express and indisputable decision, Daniel's entire share of the inheritance, properties, investments, and cash accounts, would be left to me, Emily Parker. The justification was clear. He trusted my character and integrity more than he trusted his own son. I looked around stunned. Daniel was paralyzed, shifting between disbelief and rage. The other family members looked at me as if they were trying to understand how this was possible. I myself was in shock, with the feeling that the floor had disappeared from under my feet. I remained silent, trying to process the information, while Daniel stood motionless, not knowing what to say or do. In that instant, I realized that this inheritance would change my life in a way I couldn't yet comprehend. As soon as the reading ended, Daniel stood up abruptly, shouting accusations at the lawyer and at me. He said the documents were fake, that it was absurd, that they were trying to rob him. His voice echoed through the room, filled with fury and desperation. The lawyer, with professional calm, explained that everything had been legally registered, with witnesses and with Daniel's father in full consciousness at the time of signing. There was no room to contest it without concrete proof of irregularity. Daniel insisted, his eyes red and his breath heavy, as if he were fighting not just for the money, but for his own pride. Every word he spoke sounded more like the cry of someone watching their world fall apart than a valid argument. Margaret, his mother, watched him with a mixture of sadness and disappointment, without saying a word. The lawyer concluded the meeting, stating that nothing could be changed. And I left that room with one certainty. Daniel's fight wasn't over, and this would still have consequences for me. Even after all I had suffered, a huge weight settled on me when I thought about accepting that inheritance. It wasn't about the money, but about the memory of a man who had always treated me with respect and believed in me. I wondered if accepting it would, in some way, fuel a war I no longer wanted to fight. In the following days, I thought a lot about the meaning of that decision. I could rebuild my life with security, but it would also mean carrying a constant reminder of a past that still hurt. Part of me wanted to give it all up, to start from scratch with my own strength. It was then that Margaret visited me. She held my hands and, with a firm voice full of emotion, said that this was her husband's last wish, a man who considered me a daughter. She explained that accepting it would not be an act of revenge, but an acknowledgement of the trust he had in me. I felt a lump in my throat as she concluded. "Please honor my husband's last wish," she pleaded. And I knew my decision would change much more than just my financial future. The loss of the inheritance was just the beginning of Daniel's downfall, and I watched it all from a distance, almost unable to believe what was happening. His businesses, which were already weakened by impulsive decisions and poor management, began to completely fall apart. Projects he always claimed were promising turned into enormous losses. I heard from acquaintances that investors, insecure about his public image, now tarnished by scandals and distrust, began to pull their funding without a second thought. Every attempt at recovery seemed to backfire, and his debts piled up at a frightening speed. I learned that collection letters arrived daily, stacking up on the table of the small apartment where he now lived, a cruel reminder of the failure he so desperately tried to deny. The calls from creditors were constant, and every ring of the phone made him flinch. They said he couldn't sleep, obsessed with spreadsheets, trying to find a miraculous way out that never came. The pride of being his own boss now seemed like a cruel joke, even to him. When I heard that Daniel had received an official eviction notice, I felt a mix of shock and inevitability. I knew this was just the beginning of a much deeper fall. I learned, through comments from acquaintances, that Daniel had reached the point of asking his own family for financial help. He gathered relatives, explained his situation, and asked for a temporary loan, believing his last name and former social standing would guarantee some kind of support. But from what I heard, he was met with only cold stares and evasive answers. The first blow came from his siblings, who promptly refused. Still, Daniel believed that Margaret, his mother, would give in. But to my surprise, she stood firm. She said she had seen too many of his wrong choices, and that she wouldn't put her money into a bottomless pit. Daniel tried to argue, saying it was just a rough patch, that he needed their trust. But Margaret was direct, making it clear that she would not support a life built on lies and betrayal. I heard that he even got on his knees begging for help, but was met with a categorical no. In that instant, I realized he had nowhere left to run. He was completely alone. It wasn't long before I heard that, with his debts growing and without a sufficient source of income, Daniel had to make the bitter decision to sell his own house. That place he once flaunted, a symbol of achievements and stability, had also been the stage for all the lies that led to my ruin. The selling process, I was told, was humiliating. Buyers walking through the rooms evaluating every detail, while he tried to feign a normality that no longer existed. When he signed the papers, it was as if he were giving up not just a property but his very identity. Daniel moved into a small, cheap rental apartment, far from the affluent neighborhoods he was used to. The cramped, unluxurious space reflected exactly who he had become. Someone broken inside and out. Chloe, the woman who once claimed to love him unconditionally, began to change. Their conversations grew cold, their meetings rarer, and the promises to stay together through anything sounded increasingly hollow. I tried to ignore what I felt, but deep down I already knew. Chloe was pulling away, and Daniel was about to lose the last person he had left by his side. I found out, through comments from mutual acquaintances, that Daniel and Chloe's life in the small apartment had become a field of constant tension. Chloe, accustomed to luxury, expensive restaurants and frequent gifts, started to be bothered by every detail of this new reality. A simple night without glitter or ostentation was said to be the last straw. She asked Daniel coldly how long this would last, reminding him that he had promised it was just a phase. I could almost hear the scene in my head. Daniel trying to explain with the same empty words he had so often used with me, that everything would be back to normal soon. But Chloe didn't seem convinced. She mentioned a supposed secret account he had maintained for years. His reaction, I was told, was one of immediate shock. He rushed to check and discovered that the balance was zero, every penny gone. When I heard this, I felt something strange, a mixture of sadness and inevitability. I realized something much worse than a simple fight was about to happen in their lives. The day after the argument, Chloe simply disappeared. Daniel's messages went unanswered, and his calls went straight to voicemail. At first he believed it was a game of pride, a deliberate silence. But the hours turned into days. I discovered that she had quit her job a week earlier, and that no one knew where she had gone. It seemed she had planned every step of her escape, coldly, without leaving a trace. Daniel, in desperation, tried calling again and heard only an automated message. "This number is no longer in service." I learned that he held the phone with trembling hands, unable to accept the situation. It was as if Chloe had erased her own existence, taking with her what little emotional stability he had left. It didn't take long for the reports to reach me. Daniel stood in the middle of his living room for a long time, trying to understand how everything had happened so quickly. The woman for whom he had abandoned everything, including me, was now doing to him exactly what he had done to me. The irony of life, harsh and unforgiving, revealed itself in all its intensity. What once seemed so distant now burned his skin from the inside out. He tried calling old friends, but they all dodged him, avoiding any involvement. Each declined call sounded like a cruel reminder that he was completely alone. Anger gave way to panic and panic to despair. I was told he fell to his knees on the floor, crying like a child with no strength to get up. As I heard all of this, I felt something unexpected. It wasn't pleasure, nor a sense of revenge. It was an internal silence, a recognition that life was making him pay for everything he himself had sown. And I realized that more than Chloe, what had left Daniel's life was the illusion of control he had so proudly displayed. Months of hard work, rebuilding my credibility step by step, finally began to pay off. Then, an unexpected call changed everything. A major development, known for its high standards and impeccable reputation, was looking for an interior designer capable of transforming an entire corporate space into something innovative. The recommendation came from a client who, even at the height of the rumors, never doubted my talent or my integrity. I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. This was the opportunity that could definitively mark my return to the high-end market. I prepared my proposal with extreme care, reviewing every detail, putting all of my creative vision and every lesson learned from the pain of the past into it. The meeting went better than I could have imagined. The executives were impressed with my portfolio, and with the way I had faced adversity without losing my professional focus. The sparkle in their eyes said it all. They believed in me. I signed the contract, securing one of the biggest projects of my career. And in that instant I realized this was my definitive chance to rewrite my story. The success of this new project opened doors I thought were closed forever. Former clients who had previously distanced themselves for fear of the false accusations began to seek me out again. Some apologized for their distrust, admitting that deep down, they always knew I was incapable of betraying someone's trust. Each reunion brought a wave of emotions. It was as if every handshake was a silent apology and a confirmation that my integrity had weathered the storm. My work, after all, spoke louder than any lie. My phone started ringing off the hook again, and invitations for new projects began to multiply. Seeing my name respected again was indescribable, as if an old wound was finally healing. It was in this context that I received an unexpected email. A renowned journalist wanted to interview me about my story of resilience. I didn't know it then, but this interview would become a milestone capable of changing my path even more. With my career back on track and my confidence renewed, I began to feel lighter. I no longer carried the weight of betrayal or public shame. Each achievement was a living reminder that I had survived the storm and built something new with my own strength. Beyond work, my personal life also flourished. I started taking better care of my health, dedicating time to leisure, and rediscovering small joys I had previously ignored. There was a new light in my eyes, the result not only of financial recovery, but also of a true emotional liberation. It was in this moment of serenity that Margaret appeared again. Her expression carried something different, as if she were holding a difficult secret. I remained silent, respecting her time, waiting for her to speak. She held my hand firmly, looked into my eyes and said, "There's something else you need to hear about, Daniel." My heart raced, anticipating a revelation that could change everything all over again. Margaret looked at me with a mixture of compassion and regret that almost made me look away. Her voice, firm but choked with emotion, broke the silence. Daniel had never been faithful during our marriage. Chloe wasn't the first. Over the years, he had maintained other affairs, hiding everything with convincing lies and perfectly rehearsed excuses. I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger for having been deceived for so long, but also an unexpected relief, as if everything finally made sense. The constant absences, the distant gaze, the work calls at odd hours. Every piece fell into place, revealing a cruel but definitive picture. Margaret held my hand gently, apologizing for never having told me before. She said that only now did she feel she had the right to reveal everything, because she could no longer bear to see Daniel living a lie, even after he had destroyed the life of the person who truly loved him. I took a deep breath, surprised by the strange peace that truth brought. I realized in that instant that some answers hurt, but they also set you free. Still shaken, I listened as Margaret explained the real reason behind the unexpected will. Daniel's father, over the years, had noticed the loyalty and integrity with which I dedicated myself to the family, while his own son accumulated mistakes and betrayals. He feared that if he left his inheritance to Daniel, the entire estate would be wasted, used to fuel a life without values. The patriarch had seen my suffering up close and at the same time, my firmness in remaining honest, even in the face of humiliation. Therefore, in a conscious and definitive act, he decided to ensure that I would have the means to start over with dignity. I remembered his kind gaze and how he always treated me with respect. The inheritance, which once seemed like a moral burden, now revealed itself as an act of trust, a recognition of who I truly was. My father-in-law's final words echoed in my mind. "You deserve a life of peace, without burdens that are not yours to carry." And for the first time I felt that maybe I really did deserve it. When the conversation ended, a clarity washed over me. I didn't want revenge, I wanted closure. I needed to look Daniel in the eyes and make it clear that he no longer had any power over me, that his influence was over once and for all. The idea of meeting him still caused me discomfort, but also a sense of liberation. This would be the last link to break, the final step to being completely free. Margaret saw my decision and simply nodded, respecting my need to close that chapter. That night, I wore something simple but that made me feel strong. I grabbed my car keys and drove to Daniel's small apartment, so far from the life of luxury he used to display. I parked, took a deep breath, and walked to the door. I raised my hand, ready to face my past. And when I knocked on the door, I knew that after that night, nothing would ever be the same. When the door opened for a moment, I almost didn't recognize Daniel. The man who once radiated pride and confidence now seemed fragile, worn down, and aged beyond his years. His shoulders were slumped, his skin pale, and his eyes empty, filled with pain and loneliness. It was as if life had drained every drop of the arrogance I knew so well. He stood silent when he saw me, surprised, as if he never expected I would have the courage to show up there. For a few seconds we just stood there, staring at each other. The entire past seemed to condense between us. The love that once existed, the betrayal that wounded me, the abandonment that nearly destroyed me. It was all there, in the silent space of a simple, lifeless apartment, so different from the luxurious homes he loved to flaunt. The silence was suffocating. I knew that if I didn't speak soon, we would be swallowed by the weight of what had never been said. I took a deep breath, ready to break years of silence and open the door to my own forgiveness. This would be the moment to set myself free. I looked him in the eyes and with a firm but calm voice, said that I wasn't there to argue about the past or reopen old wounds. I told him that, despite everything, I had learned to forgive him, not for his sake but for my own. I explained that forgiveness was the key to finally letting go of the pain I had carried for so long. He listened in silence, his eyes welling up, trying to absorb every word. He tried to justify his mistakes, tried to say he was sorry, but I raised my hand asking him to stop. I wasn't there for apologies. I was there to close a chapter, to finally release the chains that bound me to the past. When he tried to touch my hand, I took a gentle step back. Not out of anger, but because that gesture belonged to a time that no longer existed. The chapter had closed definitively. And in that instant, I felt a strength born within me that I had never known before. With one last look, I stood up and walked to the door. I wished him peace, just as I had finally found mine. My voice carried no hatred, only serenity. The serenity of someone who learns to let go of a weight they don't need to carry. Daniel remained seated, watching in silence as I walked out of his life forever. The strength I felt in that moment contrasted with his fragility, with the emptiness etched on his face. I closed the door behind me and in the hallway took a deep breath. A slight smile escaped without me realizing it. It was the first time in years that I felt my future was completely free, without ties, without fear. I had finally chosen the life I wanted to live. And as I walked away from that apartment, I realized I was no longer the same woman he had once left behind. I learned from Margaret that even after everything, she had still tried to help Daniel for months. She paid for some medical treatments, ensured he had the basics to survive, and held on to a silent hope that he would change. But after our last conversation, something changed in her. Margaret told me she decided to cut off all support. She said that, as painful as it was, she needed to let Daniel face the consequences of his own choices, because continuing to sustain that life was perpetuating a cycle of destruction he himself had created. I heard these words with a tightness in my chest, not out of pity for him, because I knew that every one of his decisions had led him here, but from realizing how even the strongest family bonds can wear down in the face of lies and pride. When Margaret left Daniel's apartment for the last time, the door closed with a dry, almost symbolic sound, and I realized that for the first time Daniel was completely alone, without his family as a safe harbor. Over time, it became clear that he had completely isolated himself. He no longer had friends to call, nor professional contacts willing to take his calls. Those who once flattered him when he had money and influence had disappeared, as if they had never existed. I learned that his small, unkempt apartment was deteriorating. The walls were peeling, the furniture creaked, and the shelves were empty. The absolute silence of that place seemed louder than any big city noise. At night, according to Margaret, he would lie there staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how he had reached this point. He once saw himself as invincible. Now all that remained was the echo of his own choices. I thought about how drastically life can change when you live only for yourself. It was as if he were surrounded by invisible ghosts, all created by his own decisions. As the days passed, Daniel sank into bitter memories. He remembered when I supported him as he built his career, how I believed in him when no one else did. I learned that he would cry alone, lamenting choices he could no longer undo. While he drowned in regret, my life was on a different path. I was appearing at events, surrounded by people who believed in my work and respected my journey. A photo from one of these events where I was smiling peacefully reached him. I felt no pleasure in knowing this. There was no desire for revenge, only the realization that while I was rebuilding my life, he remained trapped in what he had destroyed with his own hands. I closed my eyes that day and realized Daniel had become the very thing he feared most. Someone forgotten, living off the scraps of a past that would never return. My life took a completely different turn than I had imagined years ago. My design projects began to be featured in specialized magazines, and invitations to conferences and international collaborations became increasingly frequent. The reputation Daniel tried to destroy was now synonymous with excellence, resilience, and overcoming adversity. Financial stability brought me a freedom I had never experienced before. I was able to invest in my own company, build a passionate team, and choose only the projects that truly sparked my enthusiasm. For the first time, I had complete control over my life, professionally and personally. Each new contract, each public compliment, was more than a professional victory. It was a symbol of everything I once thought I had lost. When I believed I didn't have the strength to go on, now I knew I had one. It was then that a new international opportunity arose, one that could expand my horizons even further. And I realized that the world still held much more than I dared to dream. Despite all the recognition, I knew the real triumph was within me. I no longer depended on anyone's approval, nor did I carry the weight of old grudges. I learned to value my own company, to seek only what brought me genuine joy. On a quiet afternoon, I decided to organize my house and found a small box full of memories from the past. Old photos, notes, and mementos from my marriage to Daniel. For a moment, a soft melancholy tried to invade my heart, but a light smile took its place. Those memories belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. I took a deep breath, closed the box carefully, and stored it in the back of the closet, not as a burden but as a reminder of all I had overcome. As I closed the lid, I felt a cycle coming to a definitive end. And in that simple gesture, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. At the end of a golden afternoon, I climbed a hill near my house. From there I could see the entire city. The wind touched my face gently, as if the whole universe wanted to remind me that I was free, whole, and the master of my own destiny. I looked at that horizon and thought about everything that had happened. Betrayals, pain, losses, and the woman I had become in spite of it all. There was no regret, only a silent gratitude for having survived and transformed my story into something new, beautiful, and completely my own. I closed my eyes for a moment and smiled, feeling a serene confidence about all that was yet to come. The future was no longer a fear. It was an exciting promise. And in that exact moment I knew this was my new life and there was no turning back. Now I'm curious about you who have listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the end screen that you'll also enjoy, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.